During the Qing period of the Qing Dynasty, there was this poem called A Verse from the Capital with these lines: "If you're well-read but can't talk about Dream of the Red Chamber, then all your learning is in vain." These lines became really famous. Then, in the first year of the Daoguang period, there was this book called Food for the Year, and it had a story about this woman who was so into dream that she would stop at the most beautiful parts, close the book, and start over again, crying and all. She did this over and over, never finishing the book. She got sick, and her parents, in a panic, burned the book, which made the woman go crazy. She kept calling out for Baoyu and eventually died. It's like she read herself to death. And it's not just her. In a book from the Qing period, the Chushan Zhai collection, there's a story about a scholar who got so caught up in Dream of the Red Chamber that he neglected everything else, sighed and cried at the emotional parts, and eventually died from exhaustion. So, you see, Dream had this tragic power that even scholars and literati were said to have died from reading it. Of course, Chinese readers today won't read Dream of the Red Chamber to death. There have been big changes in Chinese society, and Western principles have become a part of Chinese life, that's for sure. But the tragedy of Dream reflects the tragedy of Chinese culture's fate, and that still holds true today. Even though we won't drop dead from reading Dream of the Red Chamber, our fondness for it is still very real. In the book A Collection of Qing Novels, someone took the time to categorize and introduce the novels that were popular during the Qing Dynasty. This book is known as a collection of Qing novels. And of course, you can't talk about this without mentioning Dream. This book has been a hit for a long time. Some well-read folks and scholars who are into it call it Redology. This Redology thing has been around for a while. During the Qing and Daoguang reigns, everyone was all about studying the classics. They were delving into textual research and getting into the classics, which they called classical studies. There was this dude, Zhu Zime, who was once teased about this. One day, a friend came to visit him and asked, "Why aren't you into classical studies?" Zhu Zime said, "I'm into classical studies too, but what I'm into is different from what others are into." This surprised his friend. Zhu Zime explained, "What I'm studying in the classics is different from what others are studying. It's like leaving out one horizontal stroke and three bends." What does leaving out one horizontal stroke and three bends mean? The traditional character for classics has the silk radical on the left, and on the right is path. If you take out the one horizontal stroke and three bends, you get the character red. The friend still couldn't get it for a moment, and Zhu Zime said, "It's red studies." In Zhu Zime's mind, Redology is just as important as classical studies. So, there was this Hu Shi reform movement that happened in late Qing Dynasty. Su Zhaowei talked about the situation in his not-too-serious newsletter. The reform policies were all the rage, and the scholars who used to be all about red studies suddenly started focusing on the economy. And by economy, they didn't mean the study of money and stuff, but rather the way of running the country, which is basically politics. These scholars who used to be into red studies switched to politics, but unfortunately Kang Yue and Liang Qichou didn't succeed. Their 100 Days reform movement was a flop, and the scholars who were into the economy went back to red studies. When China seemed to have a glimmer of hope, the intellectuals started talking about politics, trying to figure out if the nation had a future, you know? But just when things seemed hopeful, the hope got dashed, and everyone sought solace in Dream of the Red Chamber. That book became like a safe haven for the intellectuals of that time, and the tragic story in it somehow comforted them. So, we really hope that today's Chinese folks won't ditch the economy and go back to red studies again. If everyone starts getting more and more interested in red studies, it's gonna be a mess. Anyway, let's have a chat about red studies while we're at it. The study of redology, or red studies, has been thoroughly delved into in academic circles. At Fudan University, we have a professor in the Chinese department who is all about redology and specializes in its history. Alright, so the history of redology can be broken down into three main phases. First up is the Old Redology, also known as Hidden Redology. This is where things get interesting. Hidden Redology looks at Dream of the Red Chamber as a kind of code for the political shenanigans of the imperial court back in the day. The characters in the novel were actually based on real people, and the story portrays all the power struggles and drama between folks in the imperial court. Dream includes these events, but it masks the true identities. That's the hidden part. Scholars studying hidden redology try to uncover these hidden meanings, hence the whole seeking secrets thing. It's pretty fascinating when you think about it. The new hidden seeking crew is at it again, and this time it's Liu Xinwu leading the charge. So, he's gone and added his own sequel to the Dream of the Red Chamber, right? I haven't checked out his version and it's a bit awkward. I feel like I'm disrespecting him, but come on, I can't really respect him because what Lu Sun said is bang on. These hidden seeking folks are all about spreading rumors, and let's be real, rumor mongers are just snooping around for juicy gossip from the old imperial court. It's all about peeking into the secretive history of the imperial court and trying to decode the political dramas of the time through Dream. And now Liu Xinwu is jumping on this bandwagon, calling it the new hidden seeking crew. Let's give him a new title, the Fresh Rumor Monger. Sure, he's got the right to continue Dream, just like anyone else, but let's face it, the quality will speak for itself, right? The best follow-up to Dream of the Red Chamber is by Gao E. But now there's some doubt about Gao E himself. In the new edition from People's Literature Publishing House, they've changed the author's name to Cao Xueqin, anonymous. It used to be clear, right? Cao Xueqin and Gao E. I don't think it's a big deal, though. The important thing is that Gao E's sequel is still the best one out there. In his later years, Yu Pingbo really had a change of heart. You know who he used to hang out with? He was all about following Mr. Hu Shi back in the day. Then in 1921, Mr. Hu Shi dropped a study on the Dream of the Red Chamber, and that kicked off a whole new era of redology. It's like a big turning point. Before that, there wasn't any proper study of the Dream of the Red Chamber, just people speculating and criticizing stuff. But after 1921, it was all about the real deal, proper study-based redology. So, Mr. Hu Shi was all about coming up with bold ideas and then carefully checking them out using the objective spirit of historical research, right? He wanted to bring that same approach to studying Dream of the Red Chamber, and it really paid off. They did a thorough historical investigation of the novel and made some big discoveries. The main one was figuring out who the author was, and it pretty much confirmed that it was Cao Xueqin. At first, there were all sorts of claims about who wrote it, but they eventually nailed it down to Cao Xueqin. Then they looked into Cao Xueqin's family background. They didn't have all the materials they needed, but they managed to piece together a pretty good idea of Cao Xueqin's life and death based on reliable historical evidence. That's quite an achievement. So, after Yu Pingbo saw Mr. Hu Shi's book, A Study of the Dream of the Red Chamber, he wrote and published an analysis of the Dream of the Red Chamber 2 years later. Mr. Hu Shi was really pleased when he saw Yu Pingbo's book, saying that Yu Pingbo had achieved some things that he hadn't in his own book. Of course, there were still some things left to do, and those were left for Zhou Ruchang to take care of, right? These are the key figures in the development of redology through historical verification. Sure, back in the day, Yu Pingbo was on the same page as Hu Shi and dissed Gao E's sequel to the novel, thinking the last 40 chapters Gao E wrote were not as good as the first 80. Most folks still think that way, including Taiwan's Jiang Sun, right? Jiang Sun only talks about the first 80 chapters of Dream of the Red Chamber and doesn't even bother with the last 40, saying they're not up to snuff. But you know what? Later in life, Yu Pingbo had a change of heart. He felt bad for putting down Gao E's work and said that Gao E's completion of Dream of the Red Chamber was a major accomplishment. He realized that by dissing Gao E's sequel, he had made a big mistake.